It was the sweetest, most mysterious-looking place anyone could imagine. The high walls which shut it in were covered with the leafless stems of climbing roses which were so thick that they were matted together. Mary Lennox knew they were roses because she had seen a great deal many roses in India. All the ground was covered with grass of a wintry brown, and out of it grew clumps of bushes which were surely rose bushes, if they were alive. There were numbers of standard roses which had so spread their branches that they were like little trees. There were other trees in the garden, and one of the things which made the place look strangest and loveliest was that climbing roses had run all over them and swung down long tendrils which made light, swaying curtains, and here and there they had caught at each other or at the far-reaching branches and had crept from one tree to another and made lovely bridges of themselves. There were neither leaves nor roses on them now, and their thin gray and brown branches and sprays looked like a sort of hazy mantle spreading over everything. Walls, trees, and even brown grass where they had fallen from their fastenings and rung along the ground. It was this hazy tangle from tree to tree which made it all look so mysterious. Mary had thought it must be different from other gardens which had not been left all by themselves so long, and indeed it was different from any other place she had ever seen in her life.
How still it is! How still! No wonder it is still. I am the first person who has spoken in here for 10 years. Even you aren't speaking, Robin.
She moved away from the door, stepping as softly as if she were afraid of awakening someone. She was glad that there was grass under her feet, and that her steps had made no sounds. She walked under one of the fairy-like gray arches between the trees and looked up at the sprays and tendrils which formed them.
I wonder if they are all quite dead. Is it all a quite dead garden? I wish it wasn't. How can you tell? I feel sure that Ben Weatherstaff would know if it was alive or dead, just by looking at it. But all I can see are grey and brown sprays and branches, and no sign of a tiny leaf bud anywhere. But I am inside the garden, and I can come through the door under the ivy any time. It's like finding a world all my own.
The sun was shining inside the four walls, and the high arc of the blue sky over this particular piece of Misselthwaite seemed even more brilliant and soft than it had over the moor. The robin flew down from his treetop and hopped about, or flew after her from one bush to another. He chirped a good deal and had a very bushy air, as if he were showing her things.
Everything is strange and silent. It seems as if I were hundreds of miles away from anyone, but I do not feel lonely. I only wish I knew whether all the roses were dead. Perhaps some of them have lived, and might put out leaves and buds as the weather gets warmer. I do not want it to be a quite dead garden. If it were a quite alive garden, how wonderful it would be, and what thousands of roses would grow on every side!
Her skipping rope had hung over her arm when she came in, and after she had walked about for a while, she thought she would skip round the whole garden, stopping when she wanted to look at things. There seemed to have been grass paths here and there, and in one or two corners there were alcoves of evergreen with stone seats or tall moss-covered flower urns in them.
What are those? I think there was a flower bed here, though it's mostly dead grass now. But what are these sharp little pale green points? Ben Weatherstaff said something about little green points. Yes, they are tiny little growing things, and they might be crocuses, or snowdrops, or daffodils. It's the fresh scent of damp earth, just like he said. I like it. Perhaps there are some other ones coming up in other places. I will go all over the garden and look.
She did not skip, but walked, She went slowly and kept her eyes on the ground. She looked in the old border beds and among the grass, and after she had gone around, trying to miss nothing, she had found ever so many more sharp, pale green points, and she had become quite excited again.
It isn't quite a dead garden. Even if the roses are dead, there are other things alive. I don't know anything about gardening, but it seems like the grass is so thick in some places that the little green points do not have enough room to grow. Perhaps I can clear some space around them. Here's a sharp little piece of wood. I'll use it to dig around them.
And so she knelt down and dug and weeded out the weeds and grass until she made nice little clear places around them.
Now they look as if they could breathe. I am going to do ever so many more. I'll do all I can see. If I haven't time today, I can come tomorrow.
She went from place to place and dug and weeded and enjoyed herself so immensely that she was led on from bed to bed and into the grass under the trees. The exercise made her so warm that she first threw her coat off and then her hat, and without knowing it, she was smiling down onto the grass and the pale green points all the time. The robin was immensely busy. He was very much pleased to see gardening begun on his own estate. He had often wondered at Ben Weatherstaff. Where gardening is done, all sorts of delightful things to eat are turned up with the soil. Now here was this new kind of creature who was not half Ben's size, and yet had had the sense to come into his garden and begin at once. Mistress Mary worked in her garden until it was time to go to her midday dinner. She could not believe that she had been working 2 or 3 hours. She had been actually happy all the time, and dozens of the tiny pale green points were to be seen in cleared places, looking twice as cheerful as they had looked before when the grass and weeds had been smothering them. As she laid her hands upon the handle of the old door, she stopped to look back over her new kingdom.
I shall come back this afternoon.
And with that, she pulled the door open and slipped through it under the ivy.
Two pieces of meat and 2 ups of rice pudding, and such red cheeks and bright eyes. Mother will be pleased when I tell her what the skipping rope's done for thee.
In the course of her digging with her pointed stick, Mistress Mary had found herself digging up a sort of white root, rather like an onion. She had put it back into its place and patted the earth carefully down on it, and just now she wondered if Martha could tell her what it was.
Martha, what are those white roots that look like onions?
They're bulbs. Lots of spring flowers grow from them. The very little ones are snowdrops and crocuses, and the big ones are narcissuses and jonquils and daffodillies. The biggest of all is lilies and purple flags. They are nice. Dickon's got a whole lot of them planted in our bit of garden.
Does Dickon know all about them?
Our Dickon can make a flower grow out of a brick walk. Mother says he just whispers things out of the ground.
Do bulbs live a long time? Would they live years and years if no one helped them?
They're things as helps themselves. That's why poor folk can afford to have them. If you don't trouble them, most of them will work away underground for a lifetime and spread out and have little ones. There's a place in the park woods here where there's snowdrops by the thousands. They're the prettiest sight in Yorkshire when the spring comes. No one knows when they were first planted.
I wish the spring was here now. I want to see all the things that grow in England.
Art thou quite finished with the dinner?
Yes. Will you come sit on the hearth rug with me for a little while?
I can for a bit.
I wish I had a little spade.
Whatever does they want a spade for? Art thou going to take to digging? I must tell Mother that too.
Mary looked at the fire and pondered a little. She must be careful if she meant to keep her secret kingdom. She wasn't doing any harm, but if Mr. Craven found out about the open door, he would be fearfully angry and get a new key and lock it up forevermore. She really couldn't bear that.
This is such a big, lonely place. The house is lonely, and the park is lonely, and the gardens are lonely. So many places seem shut up. I never did many things in India, but there were more people to look at, natives and soldiers marching by, and sometimes bands playing, and my ayah told me stories. There is no one here to talk to, except you and Ben Weatherstaff. And you have to do your work, and Ben Weatherstaff won't speak to me often. I thought if I had a little spade, I could dig somewhere as he does, and I might make a little garden if he would give me some seeds.
There now, if that wasn't one of the things Mother said. She says, "There's such a lot of room in that big place. Why don't they give her a bit for herself, even if she doesn't plant nothing but parsley and radishes? She'd dig and rake away and be right down happy over it." Them was the very words she said.
Were they? How many things she knows, doesn't she?
It's like she says, "Any woman as brings up 12 children learns something besides her ABC. Children's as good as arithmetic to set you finding out things."
How much would a spade cost? A little one.
Well, at Thwaite Village there's a shop or so, and I saw little garden sets with a spade and a rake and a fork all tied together for 2 shillings. And they were stout enough to work with, too.
I've got more than that in my purse. Miss Morrison gave me 5 shillings, and Miss Medlock gave me some money from Mr. Craven.
Did he remember thee that much?
Mrs. Medlock said I was to have a shilling a week to spend. She gives me one every Saturday. I didn't know what to spend it on.
My word, that's riches. That can buy anything in the world they wants. The rent of our cottage is only 1 3 pence, and it's like pulling eye teeth to get it. Now I've just thought of something.
What?
In the shop at Thwaite, they sell packages of flower seeds for a penny each, and our Dickon, he knows which one is the prettiest ones and how to make 'em grow. He walks over to Thwaite many a day just for the fun of it. Does thou know how to print letters?
I know how to write.
Our Dickon can only read printing. If that could print, we could write a letter to him and ask him to go and buy the garden tools and the seeds at the same time.
Oh, you're a good girl. You really are. I didn't know you were so nice. I know I can print letters if I try. Let's ask Mrs. Medlock for a pen and ink and some paper.
I've got some of my own. I bought 'em so I could print a bit of a letter to Mother on Sunday. I'll go and get it.
She ran out of the room, and Mary stood by the fire and twisted her thin little hands together with sheer pleasure.
If I had a spade, I can make the earth nice and soft and dig up weeds. If I had seeds and can make flowers grow, the garden won't be dead at all. It will come alive.
She did not go out again that afternoon, because when Martha returned with her pen and ink and paper, she was obligated to clear the table and carry the plates and dishes downstairs. And when she got into the kitchen, Mrs. Medlock was there and told her to do something, so Mary waited for what seemed to her a long time before she came back. Then it was a serious piece of work to write to Dixon. Mary had been taught very little because her governess had disliked her too much to stay with her. She could not spell particularly well, but she found that she could print letters when she tried. This was the letter Martha dedicated to her.
My dear Dickon.
My dear Dickon, this comes open to find you well as it leaves me at present. Miss Mary has plenty of money, and will you go to Thwaite and buy her some flower seeds and a set of gardening tools to make a flower bed? Pick the prettiest ones and easy to grow, because she has never done it before and lived in India, which is different. Give my love to Mother and every one of you. Miss Mary is going to tell me a lot more, so that on my next stay you can hear about elephants and camels and gentlemen going hunting lions and tigers. Your loving sister, Martha Phoebe Sowerby.
Phoebe Sowerby. Done!
We'll put the money in the envelope, and I'll get the butcher boy to take it in his cart. He's a great friend of Dickens.
How shall I get the things when Dickon buys them?
He'll bring them to you himself. He'll like to walk over this way.
Oh, then I shall see him. I never thought I should see Dickon.
Does he want to see him?
Yes, I do. I never saw a boy that foxes and crows loved. I want to see him very much.
Now, to think of me forgetting that there. And I thought I was going to tell you first thing this morning. I asked Mother, and she said she'd ask Miss Medlock her own self.
Do you mean?
What I said Tuesday. Ask her if you might be driven over to our cottage some day and have a bit of Mother's hot oat cake and butter and a glass of milk.
It seemed as if all the interesting things were happening in one day. To think of going over the moor in the daylight when the sky was blue, to think of going into the cottage which held 12 children.
Does she think Mrs. Medlock would let me go?
Aye, she thinks she would. She knows what a tidy woman Mother is and how clean she keeps the cottage.
If I went, I should see your mother and Dickon as well. She doesn't seem to like the mothers in India.
Her work in the garden and the excitement of the afternoon ended by making her feel quiet and thoughtful. Martha stayed with her until tea time, but they sat in comfortable quiet and talked very little. But just before Martha went downstairs for the tea tray, Mary asked a question.
Martha, has the scullery maid had the toothache again today?
What makes thee ask that?
Because, when I waited so long for you to come back, I opened the door and walked down the corridor to see if you were coming, and I heard that far-off crying again, just as we heard it the other night. There isn't a wind today, so you see it couldn't have been the wind.
Thou mustn't go walking about in corridors and listening. Mr. Craven would be that there angry, and there's no knowing what he'd do.
I wasn't listening. I was just waiting for you, and I heard it. That's 3 times.
My word! There's Mrs. Medlock's bell.
It's the strangest house anyone ever lived in.
And she dropped her head on the cushioned seat of the armchair near her. Fresh air and digging and skipping rope had made her feel so comfortably tired that she fell asleep. The sun shone down for nearly a week on the secret garden. The secret garden was what Mary called it when she was thinking of it. She liked the name, and she liked still more the feeling that when its beautiful old walls shut her in, no one knew where she was. It seemed almost like being shut out of the world in some fairy place. She was beginning to like being out of doors. She no longer hated the wind, but enjoyed it. She could run faster and longer, and she could skip up to 100. Mary was an odd, determined little person, and now she had something interesting to be determined about. She was very much absorbed indeed. The bulbs in the secret garden must have been much astonished. Such nice, clear places were made round them that they had all the breathing space they wanted, and really, if Miss Mary had known it, they began to cheer up under the dark earth and to feel very much alive. During that week of sunshine, she became friendlier with Ben Weatherstaff. She surprised him several times by seeming to start up beside him as if she had sprung out of the earth. The truth was that she was afraid that he would pick up his tools and go away if he saw her coming, so she always walked toward him as silently as possible. But in fact, he did not object to her as strongly as he had at first. Perhaps he was secretly rather flattered by her evident desire for his elderly company.
Like the robin, I never knows when I shall see thee, or what side thou come from.
He's friends with me now.
That's like him, making up to the women folk just for vanity and flightiness. There's nothing he wouldn't do for the sake of showing off and flirting his tail feathers. He's full of pride as an egg's full of meat.
He very seldom talked much, and sometimes did not even answer Mary's questions except by a grunt. But this morning he stood more than usual. He stood up and rested one hobnailed boot on the top of his spade while he looked her over.
How long has thou been here?
I think it's about a month.
Thou's beginning to miss a great credit. Thou's a bit fatter than thou was, and thou's not quite so yellow. Thou looked like a young plucked crow when thou first came into this garden. Thinks I to myself that I never set eyes on an uglier, sourer-faced young'un.
Mary was not vain, and as she never thought much of her looks, she was not greatly disturbed.
I know I'm fatter. My stockings are getting tighter. They used to make wrinkles. There's the robin, Ben Weatherstaff.
There indeed was the robin, and she thought he looked nicer than ever. His red waistcoat was as glossy as satin, and he flittered his wings and tail and tilted his head and hopped about with all sorts of lively graces. He seemed determined to make Ben Weatherstaff admire him, but Ben was sarcastic.
Aye, there thou art. Thou can put up with me for a bit sometimes when there's no one better. Thou's been redding up thy waistcoats and polishing thy feathers this 2 weeks. I know what thou's up to. Thou's courting some bold young madam somewhere, telling thy lies to her about being the finest robin on Missel Moor, and ready to fight all the rest of them.
Oh, look at him!
The robin was evidently in a fascinating, bold mood. He hopped closer and closer and looked at Ben Weatherstaff more and more engagingly. He flew onto the nearest currant bush and tilted his head and sang a little song right at him.
Thou thinks thou'll get over me by doing that. Thou thinks no one can stand out against thee. That's what thou thinks.
But Ben wrinkled his face up in such a way that Mary felt sure he was trying not to look pleased. And then the robin spread his wings, Mary could scarcely believe her eyes, and flew right up to the handle of Ben Weatherstaff's spade, and alighted on the top of it. Then the old man's face wrinkled itself slowly into a new expression. He stood still as if he were afraid to breathe, as if he would not have stirred for the world, lest his robin should start away. He spoke quite in a whisper.
Well, I'm danged. Thou does know how to get at a chap. Thou does. Thou's fair unearthly. Thou's so knowing.
And he stood, without stirring, almost without drawing breath, until the robin gave another flirt to his wings and flew away. He stood looking at the handle of the spade, as if there might be magic in it, and then he began to dig again, and said nothing for several minutes. But because he kept breaking into a slow grin now and then, Mary was not afraid to talk to him.
Have you a garden of your own?
No, I'm back elder, and lodge with Martin at the gate.
If you had one, what would you plant?
Cabbages and taters and onions.
But if you were to make a flower garden, what would you plant?
Bulbs and sweet-smelling things, but mostly roses.
Do you like roses?
Well, yes, I do. I was learned that by a young lady I was gardener to. She had a lot in a place she was fond of, and she loved them like they was children, or robins. I've seen her bend over and kiss 'em. That were as much as 10 years ago.
Where is she now?
Heaven, according to what parsons say.
Well, what happened to the roses?
They was left to themselves.
Did they quite die? Do roses quite die when they are left to themselves?
Well, I got to like 'em, and I liked her, and she liked 'em. Once or twice a year, I'd go and work on 'em a bit, prune 'em, and dig about the roots. They run wild, but they was in rich soil, so some of 'em lived.
When they have no leaves and look grey and brown and dry, how can you tell whether they are dead or alive?
Wait till the spring gets at 'em. Wait till the sun shines on the rain, and the rain falls on the sunshine. Then they'll find out.
How?
Mary wanted to know so desperately that she forgot to be careful.
Look along the twigs and branches, and if thou see a bit of brown lump swelling here and there, watch it after the warm rain and see what happens. Why does thou care so much about roses and such all of a sudden?
Oh, I wanted to play that I have a garden of my own. There's nothing for me to do. I have nothing, and no one.
Well, that's true. Thou hasn't.
He said it in such an odd way that Mary wondered if he was actually a little sorry for her. She had never felt sorry for herself. She had only felt tired and cross because she disliked people and things so much. But now the world seemed to be changing and getting nicer. If no one found out about the secret garden, she should enjoy herself always. She stayed with him for 10 or 15 minutes longer and asked him as many questions as she dared. He answered every one of them in his queer, grunting way, and he did not seem really cross and did not pick up his spade and leave her. He said something about roses just as she was going away, and it reminded her of one of the ones he had said he had been fond of.
Do you go and see those other roses now?
Not been this year. My rheumatics made me too stiff in the joints. Now look here. Don't thou ask so many questions. Thou art the worst wench for asking questions I've ever came across. Get thee going and play thee. I've done talking today.
And he said it so crossly that she knew there was not the least use in staying another minute. She went skipping slowly down the outside walk, thinking him over.
You know, as queer as it seems, Ben Weatherstaff is another person I like, in spite of his crossness. I do like him. I always wanted to try to make him talk to me, and I do believe he knows everything in the world about flowers.
There was a laurel-hedged walk which curved round the secret garden and ended at a gate which opened into a wood in the park. As she reached the gate, she heard a low, peculiar whistling sound and wondered what it was. She opened the gate and went through. was a very strange thing indeed. She quite caught her breath as she stopped to look at it. A boy was sitting under a tree, with his back against it, playing on a rough wooden pipe. He was a funny-looking boy of about 12. His nose turned up and his cheeks were as red as poppies, and never had Mistress Mary seen such round and such blue eyes in any boy's face. On the trunk of the tree he leaned against, a brown squirrel was clinging and watching him, and from behind a bush nearby a pheasant was delicately stretching his neck to peep out, and quite near him were 2 rabbits sitting up on their haunches and sniffing with tremulous noises, and actually it appeared as if they were drawing near to watch him and listen to the strange, low little call his pipe seemed to make. When he saw Mary, he held up his hand and spoke to her in a voice almost as low as and rather like his piping.
"Don't thou move, it fright him."
Mary remained motionless. He began to rise from the ground, but he moved so slowly that it scarcely seemed as though he were moving at all. At last he stood up on his feet, and then the squirrel scampered back up into the branches of his tree. The pheasant withdrew his head, and the rabbits dropped on all fours and began to hop away, though not at all as though they were frightened.
"I'm Dickon. I know that, Miss Mary. I got up slow because if thou makes a quick move, it startles him. A body has to move gently and speak low when wild things is about."
Did you get Martha's letter?
"That's why I come. I've got the garden tools. There's a little spade and rake and fork and hoe. The good uns. There's a trowel, too. And the woman in the shop threw in a packet of white poppy and one of blue larkspur when I bought the other seeds."
Will you show the seeds to me?
She wished she could talk as he did. His speech was so quick and easy. It sounded as if he liked her and was not the least afraid that she would not like him, though he was only a common moor boy, in patched clothes and with a funny face and a rough, rusty red head. As she came closer to him, he noticed that there was a clean, fresh scent of heather and grass and leaves about him, almost as if he were made of them. She liked it very much, and when she looked into his funny face with the red cheeks and round blue eyes, she forgot that she had felt shy.
Let us sit down on this log and look at them.
They sat down, and he took a clumsy little brown paper package out of his coat pocket. He untied the string around it, and inside there were ever so many neater and smaller packages, with a picture of a flower on each one.
"There's a lot of mignonettes and poppies. Mignonette's the sweetest smelling thing as grows, and it'll grow wherever you cast it, same as poppies will. Them as'll come up and bloom if you just whistle to 'em. Them's the nicest thing of all." "Where's that robin as is calling us?"
Is he really calling us? He's Ben Weatherstaff's, but I think he knows me a little.
"Aye, he knows thee, and he likes thee. He took thee on. He'll tell me all about thee in a minute."
He moved quite close to the bush with the slow movement Mary had noticed before, and then he made a sound almost like a robin's own twitter. The robin listened a few seconds intently, and then answered quite as if he were replying to a question.
"Aye, he's a friend of yours."
Do you think he is? Do you think he really likes me?
"He wouldn't come near thee if he didn't. Birds are rare choosers, and a robin can flout a body worse than a man, see? He's making up thee now. Cannot thou see a chap? He's saying.
Do you understand everything birds say?
I think I do, and they think I do. I've lived on the moor with them for so long, sometimes I think perhaps I'm a bird, or a fox, or a rabbit, or a squirrel, or even a beetle, and I don't know it."
He came back to the log and began to talk about the flower seeds again. He told what they looked when they were flowers. He told her how to plant them and watch them and feed and water them.
"See, I'll keep thee plant them myself. Where is thy garden?"
Oh, well, that is... oh dear.
"Thou's got a bit of garden, hasn't thou? Wouldn't they like to give thee a bit?"
I don't know anything about boys. Could you keep a secret if I told you one? It's a great secret. I don't know what I should do if anyone found it out. I believe I should die.
"I'm keeping secrets all the time. If I couldn't keep secrets from other lads, secrets about foxes' cubs, a bird's nest, wild things' holes, there'd be not a safe place in the moor. I keep secrets."
I've stolen a garden. It isn't mine. It isn't anybody's. Nobody wants it. Nobody cares for it. Nobody ever goes into it. Perhaps everything is dead in it already. I don't know. I don't care. I don't care. Well, nobody has any right to take it from me when I care about it, and they don't. They're letting it die, all shut in by itself.
There now.
I've nothing to do. Nothing belongs to me. I found it myself, and I got into it myself. I was only just like the robin, and they wouldn't take the robin from me.
Where is it?
Come with me, and I'll show you.
For 2 or 3 minutes, Dickon stood looking round her while Mary watched him, and then he began to walk about softly, even more lightly than Mary had walked the first she had found herself inside the 4 walls. His eyes seemed to be taking in everything.
I never thought I'd see this place.
Did you know about it? Shh!
We must talk low, or someone will hear us. I wonder what's to do in here.
Oh, I forgot. Did you know about the garden?
Martha told me there was one, as no one ever went inside. Us used to wonder what it was like. The nest says will be here come springtime. It'll be the safest nesting place in England. No one ever coming near, and tangles of trees and roses to build in. I wonder all the birds in the moor don't build here.
Will there be roses? Can you tell? I thought perhaps they were all dead.
No, not 'em. Not all of 'em. Look here.
He stepped over to the nearest tree, an old one with grey lichen all over its bark, but upholding a curtain of tangled sprays and branches. He took a thick knife out of his pocket and opened one of its blades.
There's lots of dead wood as ought to be cut out, and there's a lot of old wood. But it made some new last year, and here's a new bit.
That one? The one that looks brownish-green instead of dry and grey? Is that one quite alive? Quite?
It's as wick as you or me.
I know that word. Martha told me it means alive or lively.
That's it, when the inside is dry and breaks easily, like this here piece I've just cut off. It's done for, but when it looks a bit greenish and juicy like that, it's wick.
Oh, I'm glad it's wick. I want them all to be wick. Let us go round the garden and count how many wick ones there are.
They went from bush to bush and tree to tree. He was very strong and clever with his knife, and knew how to cut the dry and dead wood away, and could tell when an unpromising bough or twig still had green life in it. In the course of half an hour, Mary thought she could tell, too. They were working industriously round one of the biggest standard roses when he caught sight of something which made him utter an exclamation of surprise.
My, who did that there?
That little clearing around those green points. I did it.
Why, I thought that didn't know nothing about gardening.
I don't, but they were so little, and the grass was so thick and strong. They looked as if they have no room to breathe, so I made a place for them. I don't even know what they are.
That was right. A gardener couldn't have told thee better. They'll grow now like Jack's beanstalk. They're crocuses and snowdrops, and these here is narcissus, and there's a daffodillies. This will be a sight. There's a lot of work to do here.
Will you come again and help me do it? I'm sure I can help too. I can dig and pull up weeds and do whatever you tell me. Oh, do come, Dickon.
Thou has done a lot of work already for such a little wench. Aye, I'll come every day if thou wants me, rain or shine. It's the best fun I've ever had in my life, shut in here and waking up a garden. I wouldn't want to make it look like a gardener's garden, all clipped and spick and span, would you? It's nicer like this, with things running wild and springing and catching hold of each other.
Don't let us make it tidy. It wouldn't seem like a secret garden if it was tidy.
It's a secret garden to be sure enough, but it seems like someone besides the robin must have been in it since it was last shut up 10 years ago.
But the door was locked and the key was buried. No one could get in.
That's true. It's a queer place. Seems to me as if there'd be a bit of pruning done here and there, later than 10 years ago.
But how could it have been done?
Aye, how could it? With the door locked and the key buried?
Are there any flowers that look like bells?
Lilies of the Valley does. And there's Canterbury bells and campanulas.
Let's plant some.
There's lilies of the valley here already. I could bring you some of the other ones from our cottage garden. Does that want 'em?
The children of a family I stayed with in India called me Mistress Mary Quite Contrary. They used to dance around me and sing, Mistress Mary Quite Contrary, how does your garden grow, with silver bells and cockle shells and marigolds all in a row. I just remembered it, and it made me wonder if there were really flowers like silver bells. I wasn't as contrary as they were.
There doesn't seem to be no need for one to be contrary when there's flowers and such alike, and such lots of friendly wild things running about and making homes for themselves, all building nests and singing and whistling, does there?
Dickon, you're as nice as Martha said you were. I like you. You make the fifth person. I never thought I should like 5 people.
Dickon sat up on his heels as Martha did when she was polishing the grate. He did look funny and delightful, Mary thought, with his round blue eyes and red cheeks and happy-looking turned-up nose.
Only 5 folk as thou likes. Who's the other 4?
Your mother, and Martha, and the robin, and Ben Weatherstaff.
I know thou thinks I'm a queer lad, and I think thou the queerest little lass I ever saw.
Then Mary did a strange thing. She leaned forward and asked him a question she had never dreamed of asking anyone before. And she tried to ask it in Yorkshire, because that was his language, and in India a native was always pleased if he knew their speech.
Does thou like me?
That I does. I likes thee wonderful, and so does the robin, I do believe.
That's 2 then. That's 2 for me.
And then they began to work harder than ever, and more joyfully. Mary was startled and sorry when she heard the big clock in the courtyard strike the hour of her midday dinner.
I shall have to go. And you will have to go too, won't you?
Mother gave me goat bread with a fine slice of bacon to put in my pocket. Run on and get thy victuals. I'll be done with mine first, and I'll get some more work done before I start back home.
Mary could scarcely bear to leave him. Suddenly it seemed as if he might be a sort of wood fairy who might be gone when she came into the garden again. He seemed too good to be true. She went slowly halfway to the door in the wall, and then she stopped and went back.
Whatever happens, you never would tell?
His poppy-colored cheeks were distended with his first big bite of bread and bacon, but he managed to smile encouragingly.
If thou was a mistletoe and showed me where thy nest was, does thou think I'd tell anyone? Not me. Thou art as safe as the mistle thrush.
And she was quite sure she was.